and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Here's what we're looking at. Our Spotlight Politics team on day 2 of jury deliberations in the corruption trial of former Alderman Ed Burke. What trends in a changing labor market or labor landscape could mean for workers?
I came back from college and this was up, and like, you've got to be kidding.
And from root beer oceans to lollipop forests, a local man creates the Cinnamon Bears miniature world of Maybeland. And now to some of today's top stories. Attorneys for former House Speaker Michael Madigan want to delay his April trial date, citing a U.S. Supreme Court case they say could impact nearly every phase of the trial. Madigan's team points to James E. Snyder versus the U.S., which could determine whether the federal bribery statute criminalizes only bribery or also gratuities, like payments made for an official action but without any quid pro quo. The High Court's review has already affected the so-called ComEd 4 case, with their January sentencing dates delayed. Justices are expected to rule in the Snyder case by next June. For more on this story, please visit our website. Just in time for the holidays, some Cook County property owners could see a refund on their taxes starting this week. Treasurer Maria Pappas says she's sending out more than $30 million in automatic refunds to about 9,000 property owners who overpaid their first installment last year. Most of those refunds will go to homeowners receiving property tax exemptions, which are applied to the second installment, reducing the total taxes due. You can check out the treasurer's website, cookcountytreasurer.com, to find out if you're in line for one of those. Android users who've used Google Play could be getting a piece of a $700 million court settlement. Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul was among a group of attorneys general who announced the settlement today over allegations the Google Play Store engaged in anti-competitive practices. The lawsuit accused the company of signing anti-competitive contracts to prevent other app stores from being preloaded on Android devices, buying off developers who might have launched rival app stores, and making it hard for consumers to directly download apps to their devices. Raoul's office says consumers who are eligible for restitution do not have to submit a claim and will receive automatic payments through PayPal or Venmo. Up next, some workplaces have changed a lot in the last 5 years. What trends in the workforce could mean for you right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Remote working, a 4-day work week, quietly quitting, a resurgent labor movement. These are just a few of the changes workers and employers have been grappling with over the last few years. So what does the future of the workforce look like? And what does it mean for companies and workers? Here to talk more about this are Bob Bruno, professor of labor and employment relations at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and author of the book, What Work Is, and Tom Gimbel, CEO of the LaSalle Network. Welcome back. Thanks to both of you for joining us again. Bob, let's start with you. We've got your book right here. You ask your students to complete the phrase, work is ... and you received a variety of answers. What were some of those answers?
Some are very profound, some are profane. Some tell us about the key themes in the way that work is experienced. Time is a powerful dimension that shapes how they think about work. They seem to be working all the time, or thinking about getting to work, or thinking about getting out of work. The spaces that they work are very informative as to how they find satisfaction or not. So space becomes an important dynamic of the workplace. Also, who they're working for, why are you working, the purpose of work, the impact that work is having on your life. So there were some powerful themes that resonated, and a lot of consistency in the way workers were responding from different occupations, different sectors. Work is almost everything in their life.
Work is almost everything. You work with students who are the future workforce, of course. What do we know about what they want in a future job or profession?
You know, in many ways they want things that my generation previous generations want. They want to be well compensated. They want a job that's going to meet their material needs. But also there needs to be meaning. There needs to be high levels of satisfaction, high levels of engagement, an opportunity to use both their physical skills, intellectual skills. They bring their whole self into the job. And I think balance, much more balance than previous generations. More time, family, more time that works in with their working life.
Tom Gimbel, would you say companies are aware of these wants that younger future workers are looking for?
Oh, I think most definitely they're aware of it. I think as unemployment's below 4%, they have to be aware of it. But I do believe that the pendulum has shifted, and now it's a situation that we're kind of moving from a more sensitive society and employment market that we had during COVID and post-COVID back to a more traditional employer setting the standards for what they expect from employee behavior, and there's what has to be done in order for businesses to not just survive like they did the past few years, but to thrive, to keep this economy going.
And recognizing, Tom, what some workers are looking for, but like you said, and the companies and employers believe they need, how do they sort of strike that balance and still, maintain the workforce that they need?
Well, I think the biggest difference between this generation and previous generations, we all had wish lists and wants. Close to home, commuting time. It might not have been unlimited vacation or work from home, but it might have been 3 weeks vacation or 4 weeks. There was always that. And I think we're acting like the wants of this generation are so different. They're not. We've all had wants. The biggest difference is that what's going on today due to remote work and COVID and the times we're in is that so many people think they can get everything on their wish list. And that's called entitlement, and that's not the way it is. And what we've seen now versus 2019 is that companies are finding employees. And right now, due to the global situation and the uncertainty of the economy, is that companies aren't hiring in bulk. While they are hiring and unemployment's staying low, they're not hiring in bulk. So employers are setting the standard and saying this is our expectation. We want you to be in the office. We need you to be here on these days or these times. And employees are realizing that they have to play by the other person's rules sometimes. It's not always take the ball and go home.
Bob, thoughts? Same question to you. What's your reaction to that? Are companies striking the balance?
Look, I think companies that are doing well, that are respectful of their employees, who attempt to inspire their employees, who look to develop their employees' talents, I think they figure it out. I think most employers don't do that very well. And as a result, you're going to find job shifting. It is continuing even with low unemployment. More and more workers have really bought into the idea of a hybrid workplace, those that can do that. So I think it's a more contested terrain than Tom suggests, and I think employees or workers are also looking for institutions that are going to represent them in that workplace. So you see this surge you mentioned in the opening, this surge in unionism and in the labor movement. So I think you have a workforce that is going to, I think they've got a different consciousness about what the balance is, but I do think smart employers who really understand how to manage a workforce that wants some meaning in their work life, I think they're going to be the winners. They're going to do well.
Tom, the other trick is that there are still 4 generations in the workforce, from Gen Z that are still coming in, and then the baby boomers, who we all know are still at work. How can companies balance the varying needs and wants of these 4 different generations?
Well, that's exactly it, is that I agree with Bob from the standpoint of you want to challenge your employees, but there's so many other things going on with companies besides just rolling out the red carpet for employees who want to have their cake and eat it too. And I think that a lot of companies are good at it, actually. I think we live in a city of Chicago, contrary to what's going on politically, that we are home to some of the best companies that have grown employees, that have created leaders. And I think when we've got Gen Xers, we've got Gen Z, millennials, and the end of the baby boomer generation in the workforce. That's a lot of balls in the air for leadership and managers to juggle on how to collaborate and communicate with that big of a discrepancy, not just in age, but in beliefs, in values, in abilities, both technologically and financially and socially, that there is so much at stake that it's not just about how you give an employee a better work-life balance. It's about how do you grow an enterprise that gives career growth, as well as the ultimate thing, servicing the customers that pay the bills for everything.
Bob, we've got about 20 seconds left. A lot of labor strikes have happened in the last year or so. What does that say about the status of the worker today?
I think, again, I'd use the term a raised consciousness. They're looking at what they experienced in the past, no longer really comfortable with it. They do believe that they have some leverage still in the marketplace. They've seen some strikes and organizing be successful, and this will incentivize and inspire them to resist, probably in ways that are much stronger than they have in the past, if they feel that they're not getting both bread and roses in the workplace.
Bread and roses sound great. Bob Bruno, Tom Gimbel, thanks to you both for joining us. I appreciate it.
Let me know where I pick up the bread and roses. I think that sounds like a good deal.
We'll call you. Up next, Spotlight Politics has the latest on a high-profile trial. Stay with us. The city is on verdict watch as jury deliberations enter day 2 in the corruption trial of former Alderman Ed Burke, and what we know about the tragic death of a young boy who was living at a migrant shelter in Pilsen. Here with all that and more is our Spotlight Politics team, Paris Schutz and Heather Sharon, who's coming into us from the Dirksen Federal Building. Starting off with some late-breaking news, team. The Colorado Supreme Court throwing former President Trump off of the ballot for 2024. Paris, what do we know?
Well, it's a 4-3 ruling by the Colorado Supreme Court. They're citing the 14th Amendment, the insurrection clause, stating vaguely anyone found to have engaged in insurrection or rebellion after taking their oath of office shall be disqualified from running again. So 4-3, all these justices were appointed by Democratic governors in Colorado. They're staying this ruling pending an appeal till January 4th. So you would imagine the Trump campaign's going to appeal this right away to the U.S. Supreme Court. You would imagine a case of this magnitude, the Supreme Court would hear right away. And if you look at the makeup of the Supreme Court, 6-3 conservative justices, and the fact that Trump is indicted. He is indicted for his role in the January 6th Capitol riot, but not convicted yet. There hasn't been a trial. So it's all in how you interpret the language here. The 14th Amendment's kind of vague, and I would think there's very strong odds that the Supreme Court, we don't like to predict things, but would not agree with this decision. I don't know if Heather has a different take on that.
Heather, what do you make of it?
Well, I think that there's a very high standards in these sort of cases where you have the federal Supreme Court weighing in on what they believe federal law is. So I think that Paris is right. The Colorado Supreme Court ruling is an interpretation of federal law, and we all know that the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, is the ultimate arbiter of that. I would just say that there have been several rulings that went against former President Donald Trump's requests by the United States Supreme Court. They have ordered him to turn over documents to the January 6th Commission, and to this point, they have refused to step in when he has asked them to. So I think that this is very much a moment of uncertainty. I think it's an incredible moment of honest to goodness constitutional crisis where we have a state Supreme Court declaring that the frontrunner for the Republican presidential nomination engaged in insurrection and should be disqualified for the ballot. A stunning development tonight.
Absolutely. So Heather, sticking with you because you've been covering the Burke trial. Obviously, you were at the Dirksen building. Deliberations, as we know, are ongoing. No verdict today. But what is the atmosphere like down there?
Well, the jury has been deliberating so far for about 10 hours, and we don't really know what's going on behind those closed doors. We heard from the jury a couple of times today, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's just watchful anticipation. If there isn't a verdict by Friday at 5 p.m., the jury will take the week of the Christmas holiday off and come back on January 3rd. And everyone I talked to today, lawyers, court watchers, reporters, hope for a verdict before Christmas, but it is a massive case, a very complicated set of jury instructions, and a lot that they have to work through.
Heather, you mentioned, you did hear from the jury a couple of times today. We know that they sent out a couple of notes looking for some clarification. What do they want to know?
Well, they had a question involving 2 of the 4 criminal schemes that Alderman Ed Burke is charged in connection with. One, the redevelopment of the old post office. They wanted to know whether Amtrak, which of course is in control of the tracks that go underneath that massive building, whether those representatives were public officials, which could come into play when dealing with whether there were official acts taken as part of the conspiracy, or if there was sort of untoward inducement offered. The other question involved one of Alderman Burke's co-defendants, Charles Quay. They asked whether, in that sort of bribery allegation, whether or not they could define what exactly taking unlawful payments meant. Now, the judge said in that case, you've got all the information you need to figure it out. In the question about the Amtrak officials, the judge simply said no, Amtrak representatives are not public officials. So the jury is a little bit on their own in sorting out these cases, but that is what they've been charged to do, and that's why they hold former Alderman Ed Burke's fate in their hands.
And like you said, they've got a lot to wade through between the instructions and obviously weeks of testimony, recordings. Paris, as we know, Burke wielded enormous influence over the city council for his time there for many years. How would you assess the significance of this trial, and is anything standing out to you?
Probably the most influential alderman, at least over the last 50 years, the longest serving alderman, chairman of the finance committee. I think we've said this a million times, like after the Blagojevich trial, public officials are going to think twice now. Well, look where we are, 12 or some years later. But, if you look at the nature of these charges, you look at like kind of penny ante things like a driveway redevelopment of a Burger King, things like getting an internship, trying to get an internship for the child of a friend. I have to say, that last thing, those are the kinds of things older people have been engaged in for many years, and in whether they, went over the line of criminality or not, they're going to have to think twice if Burke is convicted for these things. And also the fact that Solis wore a wire. Back in 2016, when they found that out, they were all thinking twice about who they wanted to talk to or tell the truth to, because they were wondering who was going to, quote unquote, rat them out. So yes, a conviction of the most powerful alderman, at least of the last 50 years, is going to have significant resonance.
Of course.
Resonance.
So of course, let's pivot to the very tragic death of a 5-year-old boy, Jean Carlos Martinez Rivero, at a Pilsen migrant shelter on Sunday. There is a police investigation underway, but of course, a lot of questions, Paris. Do we know any more about the child's cause of death?
We're waiting the medical examiner to issue an official cause of death. Late this evening, the mayor's office issued an update on what happened, saying that he was rushed to the emergency room at 13 minutes after shelter staff at this Pilsen shelter had witnessed a medical emergency. So he's saying they responded right away. We also know that he had suffered for days with a fever, 100 degrees. He had begun vomiting on that day he was taken to the hospital. We know that he had a seizure. What the mayor's office is also saying is that there's no evidence that there's some kind of infectious disease going down, or some kind of like communicable thing, even though there have been 5 other people taken to the hospital with respiratory illnesses. So again, we wait the medical examiner's official cause of death.
Of course. So the mayor addressed the issue of the young boy's death at an unrelated press conference yesterday. Here's a little bit of what he had to say.
People are showing up in very extreme circumstances, very, very unhealthy. And so what I'm confident is that all of our levels of government are coming together to provide support for these individuals who are seeking asylum. Of course, we're providing support for the family, and we are obviously deeply sorry and hurt by this loss.
Heather, about 45 seconds left after the debacle of the canceled Migrant base camp in Brighton Park. How much does this death ramp up pressure on the city and the state officials to find something more suitable for migrants?
So it ramps up an incredibly tough situation, and it makes it just that much work. Mayor Brandon Johnson promised to find places for the migrants to live with dignity. And I don't know that living in a shelter that was a converted industrial building that was meant to house 1,000 people, which is now housing more than 2,000 people, I think that there are going to be a lot of questions about whether that actually can provide dignified lodgings. And I think a question that I don't know the answer to tonight is whether the move to get the migrants out of the police stations before winter truly sets in Chicago, whether they have just shifted the problem from the police stations to the shelters.
To the shelters, okay.
I know we're going to say favorite staffing, the company contract with it. They have a $40 million contract with the city, and they've billed for tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah,
so
certainly
there's
a lot more
questions
questions to answer. We'll cover that in the next Spotlight. Heather Sharon, Parachutes. Thanks, team. Up next, a land of holiday magic in miniature. But first, a look at the weather. Chicagoans who remember shopping at the Weebolt's department store might remember their Christmas character, Patty O'Cinnamon, better known as the Cinnamon Bear. But they might not know that Mr. O'Cinnamon was also the star of a 1930s-era radio serial, which followed his adventures through the enchanted world of Maybeland. The show charmed audiences for decades, but its biggest fan might have been Chicago man Ronald Konecki, who created a miniature version of their adventures in his Portage Park basement. Producer Erica Gunderson takes us through the lollipop forest and root beer oceans of Maybeland.
It's been years since these lollipop forests, root beer oceans, and glittering ice castles have been unwrapped in time for Christmas.
It is all based on a Christmas radio show. The radio program was called The Cinnamon Bear.
The 8-foot-wide diorama depicts the adventures of the Cinnamon Bear and siblings Judy and Jimmy Barton through the enchanted world of Maybeland. Their story was handcrafted in intricate miniature by Chicago hobbyist Ronald Konecki, who listened to the radio show as a child and later with his own family in Portage Park.
It started out in the 1930s, but we listened to it in the 70s on a radio show, and it was usually 3 episodes a day. So it usually started the Saturday after Thanksgiving, right up to the Saturday before Christmas. And what he did was he recreated every episode, which each one of these displays.
Most winters, Maybeland remains packed away. But this year, Konecki's son Tony has brought it back to life in hopes of finding a new home for the display. Tony Konecki says his father was always tinkering with miniatures. But Ronald, who died in 2017, never meant for his creations to be seen outside the family home.
He would be making models, airplanes, tanks, ships, figures in the basement on his spare time. And one Christmas, he built a smaller version of the Cinnamon Bear story for underneath our Christmas tree.
Silver Star? What Silver Star?
Don't try to quibble, crazy quilt. Hand it over gratefully and you can go your way.
In 1951, a TV series using the radio show's audio was created using hand puppets for the characters. In 1986, radio host Chuck Shaden interviewed Ronald Konecki about that first display for his Chicago Nostalgia show.
Where did you get the idea for all this? From, of course, the radio show, right?
Of course, Chuck, just like you, listened to the radio show after school, and then the imagination just took over.
After that, Tony Konecki says his dad's ambitions for building a tiny Maybeland got, well, bigger.
I came back from college in '85, and this was up. And like, you've got to be kidding. This blocked out the entire windows. It was so big. Because when he was making this, you couldn't go down to the store and find crazy quilt dragons, pirates, magicians, so he had to be creative. This rabbit that was from a model that I actually put together as a kid. It was a dinosaur model, and my dad took it, and he had a rabbit for this scene. The Wintergreen Witch, who was the main enemy in this, was actually a glow-in-the-dark prize from Cracker Jack.
Konecki says he's still not sure why his father was so captivated by the Cinnamon Bears story. But now he's hoping there's another Cinnamon Bear superfan out there who would like to bring the magic of Maybeland home.
I like to see it go somewhere where people can enjoy it, look at it, and maybe go back to when they were a kid.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Erica Gunderson.
That is impressive. Tony Konecki tells us he'd love to hear from anyone who might have a place for the Cinnamon Bears adventures. His contact information is on our website. And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. Join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10 for Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Mayor Brandon Johnson joins us to talk about his new community safety plan, the migrant crisis, and more. And reaction to the Chicago Board of Education's efforts to move away from school choice. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, wishing all a happy and healthy holiday season.